Hey everyone, I'm Kiana Reeves. I'm the Chief Intimacy Officer at Foria, and welcome to the Foria YouTube channel. Today we're going to dive into a really interesting subject, orgasms, particularly the question that many people are asking, which is deeply personal and universally interesting, which is, what does an orgasm feel like? So before we describe what an orgasm feels like, we kind of have to rewind and go, why is someone asking this question? Why are you asking this question? My guess, it's because you're looking for confirmation. Did I have an orgasm? Or maybe you felt something like, I don't know, maybe it could be, you're not sure what it is. Or you're curious about the way that different orgasms can feel or how to recognize the difference between one or all of them. So this question isn't just about language, it's about validating our own experiences and understanding our bodies. That said, we're going to dive into defining what an orgasm really is and how it's different than climax, because they actually mean two separate things. So in medical terms, an orgasm is a reflex. At the peak of sexual arousal, it's often involuntary and accompanied by rhythmic muscle contractions in areas like the uterus, the vagina, and the anus. So you might wonder, what's the difference between climax and orgasm? Well, in the world of somatic sexology, which is my background, we describe climax as the actual physical experience of that rhythmic pulsing peak moment of a sexual experience, and orgasm as something that can happen more than once, that can happen in waves, that can become more of a state of energy versus one climactic point versus one peak of sexual pleasure. The orgasmic energy can be an entire prolonged experience, hours, 45 minutes, you name it. So let's talk about the scientific stats on the female orgasm, because this is really important. This data helps us demystify this experience for many women. So one study found that only 18.4% of women report that intercourse penetration without any added stimulation to the clitoris was enough to bring them to orgasm. That's interesting, right? That's a very small percentage. It's less than 20% of women are able to reach orgasm through penetration alone. So another study found that 36% of women said that clitoral stimulation was absolutely necessary for orgasm to be reached. 36% said clitoral stimulation wasn't needed, but it made orgasm feel better or stronger. Research on intercourse categorized this as assisting, right? Where clitoral stimulation is included, helps to increase orgasm rates to 50 or 60%, while unassisted or penetration alone is roughly about 20 to 30% across different studies. So if we're looking broadly across sexual encounters, another study reported that during sexual activity, less than 30% of women reach orgasm. Just listen to that. Across all sexual activity, less than 30% of women are reaching orgasm, whereas over 90% of men do. This is called the orgasm gap or the pleasure gap. You can research it. This is primarily occurring in heterosexual experiences. But here's where it's interesting. Women who have sex with other women report much higher orgasm rates, up to 83%, highlighting this real importance of the clitoris being prioritized. And on a general anatomical level, 70 to 80% of women actually require direct clitoral stimulation to have an orgasm. Although there's indirect routes like penetration that sometimes stimulate the clitoris up and behind, which also can help. They're much less reliable is the point here. So if you take anything from these statistics, it's that there's a huge discrepancy between the regularity of the amount of orgasms for women versus the amount of regularity for orgasms for men when they're in partnered experiences, that 20% of women are able to reach orgasm just through penetration alone with no clitoral stimulation directly on the clitoris, and that roughly 80% of women are saying that they need clitoral stimulation to reach orgasm. It's very important. Okay. We're going to dive into the different types of orgasms. There's clitoral, there's penetrative, and there's combo. We could break these down further into like G-spot and cervix and AFE zone and anal and breast. But for today's purposes, we're going to specifically talk about clitoral, combo, and penetrative. So a clitoral orgasm comes from stimulating the external clitoris directly via fingers, via oral, via toys. And often these orgasms from the clitoris are described as sharper or stronger, like more specific. They're definitely easier to reach for many women, and they're more controllable, meaning as you approach them, you can tell they're coming, and you might back off, you might approach, you might be able to kind of help them happen more easily than the G-spot or the internal orgasms. So when we're talking about penetrative orgasms or vaginal orgasms, these come from penetration alone. Again, these are way more rare. Only 20% of women are having them if there's no involved. I'm not going to bore you with the science, but the clitoris is always involved because the clitoris is way bigger than we actually thought it was, and science is still catching up to the biology of the female anatomy. You are stimulating the clitoris when there's penetration, but you're not stimulating the external clitoris. You're stimulating the parts of the clitoris that are inside of the body. Either way, penetrative orgasms are harder for most people to reach. They're often described as deeper, as more pulsing, they're longer. Sometimes some people describe them as more exhausting. But you just need to remember the clitoris still plays a role, because even when the stimulation feels like it's inside anatomically, the research shows us that penetration indirectly stimulates the clitoris, the internal parts, which makes this distinction between external and internal a little bit hard, more of a social or perceptual one. Here's the sweet spot. Here's what you want to learn. Combo orgasms. So this is simultaneous stimulation of the clitoris while there's penetration. These are often the most intense. They're easier to reach. If someone has trouble reaching penetrative orgasm, bringing the clitoris in can really amplify and make that easier to reach. And the research really supports this, that the combination of penetration and clitoral stimulation produces the highest likelihood of intensity and pleasure during the orgasm. Now we're going to go into your question. What does an orgasm actually feel like? Okay, this is what you came here for. This is how real women describe this subjective, sometimes elusive experience that's both poetic and romantic and pleasurable and grounded in sensation and quite beautiful to read. So from research interviews, we have clitoral orgasms feeling sharper, easier to reach, more controllable, and penetrative orgasms being described as wilder, deeper, more pulsating, and extending longer. And some women describe penetrative orgasms as more unifying with their whole body, encompassing not just their genitals, but their whole body. And on a lot of forums, a lot of anecdotal accounts, women will say things like, there's warmth spreading from the center of my body, throbbing that's radiating outwards, waves of release, full body bliss. Some people describe them as feeling lightheaded or heavy with pulses in the belly. Words like wave, build up, release, pulsate, whole body warmth, and electricity show up again and again when it comes to describing orgasms. And some people talk about this brief moment of feeling kind of like shivery or fluttering, or these ripples traveling from the orgasm, from the core of the orgasm out through the whole body. And across all experiences, these common themes include a buildup of tension, warmth, a peak release, often setting, pulsing, throbbing, localized sensation, and then spreading this sensation of warmth or wave-like energy. Often there'll be tremors or contractions, and afterwards you'll feel relaxed, sometimes lightheaded, sometimes exhausted, sometimes energized, sometimes open and alive and energized. So it's very common to have a whole mixture of experiences, and it's very common to be emotional, particularly after a deep orgasm or deep multiple orgasms. And I hope this helped you today, helped you demystify what orgasm can feel like, because truthfully, there's really no singular way to describe it. It's a very personal experience. It's as varied as the people who are experiencing them. But what's important to remember is what you feel is valid, and to pay attention to pleasure, pay attention to what feels good, and know that clitoral stimulation is really an ally for you exploring more of your orgasmic potential. Thanks for spending a few minutes with us. If you found this helpful, please like it, please share, please comment, and if you have questions, drop them below.